integrity of the system is properly in place. I stand for doing the right thing, and the right thing is to make sure that this SEC has the right amount of capital in place to protect our investors and our investments. And I thank you for the time. I yield back.
Gentleman from Texas yields back the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed say no. In the opinion of the chairs, the noes have it, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. The
recorded vote.
Gentleman has asked for a recorded vote, and pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise?
I have an amendment at the desk, amendment number 506.
Clerk will read.
Amendment number 506, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Holt of New Jersey.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the Chair. The continuing resolution bill before us handcuffs the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau by setting a maximum level that the Federal Reserve can fund the CFPB for the fiscal year that we are in. This amendment would allow the CFPB to function as intended. As a result of an open process last year that included a rare House-Senate conference, the Congress passed historic reforms to the nation's financial system. It included such things as providing for disassembly of large, failing financial institutions so taxpayers wouldn't be saddled with the bailout. And it did a number of other things. But I would argue that probably the most important thing it did was to create a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Members of the House and the Senate, after much deliberation, concluded that in order for the CFPB to protect effectively American consumers, it must be independent. The Dodd-Frank legislation, which is the law of the land, is clear on this point. This new financial watchdog, which would serve consumers in every kind of financial transaction, where they had had no aid, no protection, no help before, would be an independent organization, insulated from partisan fights on Capitol Hill, deriving its operating budget from the Federal Reserve. May I ask for order?
Gentleman is correct. The committee is not in order. The committee is not in order. Members are advised to take their conversations off the floor. The gentleman from New Jersey.
I thank the Chair. Section 1017(2)(c) was very explicit on this. Now, some of the appropriators, being the appropriation animals that they are, may not like the fact that this is to be kept independent of appropriations. But it was to give this commission independence so that they could offer protection for the consumer. Now, I suppose we should applaud the ingenuity of the authors of this continuing resolution to get around the law of the land. Maybe we should applaud their sheer nerve in trying to defund this board. Now, less than 2 months into the 112th Congress, the majority, through this continuing resolution bill, is attempting to sneak through a provision in direct conflict with the spirit of the law, the intention of the law, and in direct contradiction to this intent to protect the consumer. It handcuffs the CFPB in order to preserve the status quo that benefits big banks at the expense of American consumers. If we've learned any lesson from the financial crisis of the last several years, it should be this. By protecting consumers, we can protect the rest of the financial system. This amendment simply would correct Section 1517 by inserting the appropriate amount of money that the CFPB estimates that it will need to get the work done for the sake of American consumers. This amendment would ensure that the recently created Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, when it assumes Consumer Protection Authority this summer, will have the independence and will have the resources that it needs to begin its critical work of protecting consumers and, by extension, protecting the entire financial system of this country. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman from New Jersey yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Missouri rise?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady from Missouri is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, I rise in opposition to the amendment. The continuing resolution already cuts the IRS by over $600 million compared to FY10 and over $1 billion compared to the FY11 request. And I believe that further cuts to the IRS's enforcement division will ensure that the tax cheats win because there are going to be fewer audits, fewer investigations, fewer prosecutions, fewer convictions. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was created by Dodd-Frank to promote fairness and transparency, but the Bureau itself seems to be anything but transparent. The general powers, organization, and goals of the Bureau are laid out very well in the law, but the specifics of how the Bureau will use its powers and achieve its goals are not known. Moreover, the Dodd-Frank law provides $500 million a year from the Federal Reserve to the Bureau without any input from the Congress at all. So without a doubt, I'm not disagreeing that there is a strong need for consumer protection. I'm a mom. I believe in that very strongly. But just as commerce shouldn't run wild, neither should consumer protection. And so the limitation in the bill, I believe, represents an adequate level. It represents the level of resources that are currently expended by regulatory agencies on consumer protection activities. For example, the Office of Comptroller of the Currency, which we all know will move into the Consumer Financial parts of it will move into the Consumer Protection Financial Protection Bureau. I believe that we should look at this a little later because as the Bureau's specific activities become known and the cost of those activities become known, then we're going to have an opportunity to revisit the limitation. Providing $500 million a year without any congressional oversight to the Bureau is, I believe, a very irresponsible abdication of a constitutional check and balance, and would ask colleagues to vote no on the amendment and impose unchecked and unbalanced bureaucracy, and I yield back.
Gentlelady from Missouri yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina rise?
To strike the last word.
Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to congratulate the gentlelady from Missouri for an acrobatic defense of the continuing resolution's treatment of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. This is not about whether government should be big or small. It is about which side government should be on. The CR, the continuing resolution, does not save a penny from the deficit because the money for the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, comes from a separate source of funding. This is really about hobbling the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to keep it from getting up and running and doing its job. The CFPB is to put government on the side of Americans who are trying to make an honest living so they don't have to worry every time they sign a financial contract that they're going to get gouged, they're going to get cheated out of their income and their life savings by some trick or trap, some dishonest little clause hidden in the fine print of the legalese written by the bank's lawyers. The CFPB will set rules to make sure those contracts are honest, and it will enforce those rules. And it has not started yet, so it's a little early to criticize them for not getting the job done. The CR, by cutting funding by half or a little more than half, is really about putting government or continuing to have government, as it has been for most of the last decade, on the side of the financial predators who were not trying to make an honest living, but were trying to make a killing and succeeding in making a killing by cheating ordinary Americans with the fine print. And they cheated them on mortgages, on credit cards, on overdraft fees, and on, and every American knows it because just about every American has experienced it. Now, a couple of, in talking about the SEC earlier, Ms. Waters and Ms. Green both used, Mr. Green both used the term cop on Wall Street. They didn't attribute that phrase, but it's from Will Rogers. Back in the Great Depression, even after we learned of all the corruption and the fraud that had led to the collapse on the stock market crash, when Congress was considering legislation, a bill, a law that would have set rules for Wall Street and given the Securities and Exchange Commission the power to enforce it, the securities industry fought it fiercely because, as Will Rogers said, the boys on Wall Street don't want a cop on their block. And of course they don't want a cop on their block. They'll make less money. They don't want a cop on their block now either. They don't want the CFPB now either because they will less, if their contracts have to be honest, they will make less money. Vote to put government on the side of Americans trying to make an honest living. Vote to put a cop on the Wall Street block. Vote for this amendment.
Will the gentleman yield?
I do yield.
Thank you so very much. I just want to point out one thing. CBO does score this amendment at saving 30. It says that the text of the bill scores our limitation at $30 million for FY11.
I now yield to Mr. Frank.
I thank the gentleman. And when we saw that CBO did that, we decided we had to offset that. So we did, as the gentlewoman indicated, go to the IRS. And I do want to say the gentlewoman is, I guess, being very responsible as chair of the subcommittee. She is defending the Internal Revenue Service against the Consumer Bureau and the SEC. And the gentlewoman is entitled to due credit for her staunch support of the IRS as we try to divert funds to protect consumers and police Wall Street. And I'm sure there are many in the Tea Party who will be very grateful for her staunch support for the IRS funding.
Gentleman from North Carolina, yield back his time?
I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri rise?
Madam Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman from Missouri is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Chairman, I rise this afternoon to oppose this amendment. It's kind of, let me start my discussion by talking about two things. Number one, about the usefulness of the committee, and then about the funding of the committee as a whole. Number one, I have some grave concerns with regards to the usefulness of the committee to begin with. As a former bank regulator in one of my previous careers, it's kind of astounding to me that with all of the laws that are in place, we had all the problems that we did. We don't need more laws. We need to enforce the ones that are in place. And in testimony yesterday on our committee in financial services, that was the general consensus of many of the folks that were there. And so what we're doing is trying to continue to overregulate and again put in place another entity to confound and to promote some more regulation, exactly what we don't need in the private marketplace. But again, why are we having another committee to do more regulation when we could have the existing people do the job the right way? You know, it's kind of like, to me, having a police department that doesn't do its job, and instead of firing everybody at the police department and starting over and find some good folks who can do the job, you create another police department. So now we have two police departments to fund. And I think that's what's going on here, and this is why I'm very concerned about this model, about this agency, this committee, this board. And from the standpoint of being a former examiner, this is exactly the wrong thing to do with regards to the mission of this committee. We are now putting consumer protections over safety and soundness of our institutions, and that's wrong. That is absolutely the wrong model. We're flipping completely upside down. We are reprioritizing the way financial markets should work and regulatory systems should work. In my view, we're going the wrong direction. But with regards to the funding mechanism that's in place, this group at this point has a line of credit basically from us, and this CR cuts that off to a limited amount, which the chairman a minute ago made it addressed as $80 million, and we think that's an adequate fund at this point. They're only going to use at the annual rate of about $65 million, and this amendment intends to put $63 million back into it. I think that's unnecessary. It's wasteful, At a time like this, when we need to be consolidating and finding ways to cut our dollars, we don't need to empower an agency that we don't need, number one, with powers that are not defined at this point. We don't need to be doing it. From the standpoint we don't even have a director in place yet. We need to be confining this thing so we can provide oversight over it rather than giving it a blank check and unlimited powers. With that, Madam Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman from Missouri yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California rise?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker and members, I have long been an advocate of consumer protections and consumer rights, and I'm proud of the work we accomplished in the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act of 2010 to create a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Madam Speaker and members, I didn't get elected to the Congress of the United States of America to protect big banks, banks too big to fail, or to protect their shoddy products, criminal schemes that are designed to rip off innocent citizens who go to work every day. I don't know how anybody can come to this floor and represent that the consumers, the workers, the people of this country don't need any protection. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is needed because it is very clear that our current regulatory framework inadequately protects consumers. Just look at the wrongful foreclosures on our veterans, which was exposed by reporters last month and was the subject of a Veterans Affairs hearing last week. You go tell those veterans that they didn't need that protection, that they shouldn't be protected. The proliferation of harmful financial products and practices went unchecked because our banking regulators were tasked with both consumer protection and bank safety and soundness responsibilities. And we've seen that pro-bank, anti-consumer stance won every time. That's why we created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, to make sure that the consumer voices aren't shouted down by the industry and that an independent agency is beholden to the consumers and not the CEOs of the big financial institutions. Opponents of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau claim we don't need this agency, they say, because the other banking regulators are already charged with consumer protection. This argument doesn't hold water. Because there are several types of consumer financial products which, because they were offered by non-banks, fall into what may be classified as the shadow banking industry. These products and institutions escape federal regulation, yet often lead to federal problems, such as our current economic foreclosure crisis. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau would bring non-banks who offer financial services to and interact with consumers into our regulatory system. Another reason the CFPB was needed is to protect consumers from complicated products and hidden predatory fees. According to Elizabeth Warren, who is a special advisor to the Treasury on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the average credit card offer now comes bundled with more than 100 pages of fine print. Buried within this fine print are provisions about restrictions, teaser rates, and penalties. This fine print makes it nearly impossible for consumers to make informed decisions and pick the credit card or other lending product which is right for them. This leads some borrowers to be trapped in credit cards or loan products with hidden and abusive fees. The CFPB would resolve this problem by working with the industry to reduce the fine print and hidden fees. We also need CFPB to provide stability to our financial markets, which are supported by consumer lending. Our current crisis began when collateralized debt obligations and mortgage-backed securities were packed with exotic products, which are known as no-doc loans, some of them, and liar loans. It was exacerbated as consumers were continually squeezed with excessive penalties and fees from bank products, reducing purchasing power and leading families everywhere to make tough decisions. A strong regulator one which focused solely on consumer safety and championed simple disclosure and products, could have prevented all of this. We need CFPB. This kind of crisis should never occur again. Amendments to defund CFPB or to prevent it from doing its work will only hurt Americans' consumers and, in turn, our economy. So I urge a no vote on these amendments. Madam Speaker and members, I don't know how any elected official could go home and talk to their constituents and tell them they want to limit the funding to the SEC, the cop on the Wall Street block to protect investors, and then add to it, and I don't want you to have any consumer protection. We don't like what has been done. We're against these kinds of regulations. It is baffling. It is not to be understood.
Time's
and
expired.
I believe that in the final analysis, this body will do the right thing. We must do the right thing.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes, and the committee will be in order. The committee will be in order. Members are advised to take their conversations off the floor. Gentleman from Texas.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I rise in opposition to the Holt Amendment. And kind of listening to the banter that we've been hearing back and forth, you think we were trying to eliminate the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. But in fact, what we're trying to do is limit it. One of the things, if you look at the history of this entity, is that it's the typical answer in Washington. When we have other regulators that aren't doing their job, the solution always is, let's throw more regulation, more regulators, and more money at the problem. And so what did we do with this new bureau? Well, we said, guess what? We're going to throw $700 million at this new agency. We're going to take $500 million out of the Fed, and we're going to give them the ability to come and ask for another $200 million. Now, what's going on right now is that we don't even have a director at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, yet they're standing up a new organization. And so basically what we have from this administration is another czar. I don't know how many czars that they have over there, what the latest count is, but here we are spending an agency that has the authority to spend millions of dollars, yet we can't even get this. Madam Chairman, the House is not in order. Madam Chairman, the House is not in order.
The committee is not in order. The gentleman is correct. The gentleman affords the respect to be heard. The committee is not in order. Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you. One of the most egregious parts of this, and it was very clever by the other side, is they realized in the last days of the 111th Congress that there were going to be a change possibly in November 2nd. They tucked this entity over into the Fed, trying to be able to limit Congress's ability to have oversight over this organization. And so I want to applaud the Appropriations Committee for figuring out a way to bring some accountability to this organization. Now, what's at play right now is that this entity in August received $18.4 million. In December, they received $14.37 million. And if you annualize that rate, they're going to need less than $65 million. And yet, what we're saying is Republicans want to limit that to $80 million. This amendment, the Holt Amendment, wants to increase that another $63 million. You know, Madam Chairman, what's exactly wrong, and the reason we've been having these hours and hours and hours of debate is the American people spoke very clearly last November. They're tired of big government. They're tired of government trying to make all of their decisions. And what this new entity is going to do is going to hurt consumers in that it is going to drive the cost of consumer credit up for many Americans. It's going to, some of the financial services that they've been able to enjoy, this new czar will have the ability to say that those products cannot be offered anymore. And so bringing this kind of accountability into this process is a very positive thing. It was a mistake to put this entity in the Fed to begin with. It's a mistake to let this administration continue to stand up this organization without going through the appropriate constitutional requirement that this person be confirmed by the United States Senate. It's an egregious use of the executive power, and one of the things that we hope that the President will do very quickly is nominate someone to oversee this organization. But basically we have people that haven't been nominated or confirmed by the Senate, making very big decisions, spending millions of dollars over here, standing up an entity, quite honestly, that will not, in fact, do what a lot of the folks in this building think this entity is going to do, and that's provide consumer protection. What this entity is going to do is provide more cost to consumers. And with that, I urge defeat of this amendment.
For what purpose does the gentleman rise? Member of the committee.
Thank you, Madam. I would like to inform the Chair and the balance of the people here that it is our intent to finish this amendment and Mrs. McCullum's amendment, and then we'll be going to a vote. And I thought, for information purposes, I'll let everybody know what our intent we'd like to do.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota rise?
I rise in support of move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, after 4 million foreclosures, perhaps we're going to reach 7 million foreclosures, $17 million in loss of home value, after massive unemployment, after an enormous financial bailout bill that we had to do to save this economy, it's impossible for me to understand how it is anybody would not want to have a strong consumer protection provision in our law. How in the world, after the massive recession that we went through, after all the damage that has gone through to hit this economy, which started in the consumer sector, Madam Chair, which started because consumers were taken advantage of with no-doc, low-doc, ninja loans packaged into securities and then hedged by these credit default swaps, which Warren Buffett called means of financial destruction. How could we want to undermine consumer protection? The fact is, consumer protection helps to make sure that we have a strong, sound, and safe system, and if it would have been in place, we would not be in this situation now. We are in this situation now for one reason and one reason only. It is the laissez-faire attitude that pervades the opposition to this fair amendment, and it should be passed. The Holt amendment is right, and I yield to the chairman.
I thank the gentleman. Just to make this point, my colleague from Texas said, well, because the old regulation wasn't working, we wanted just an additional regulator. No, that's simply untrue. What we said was this. Consumer regulation before the passage of the financial reform bill was entrusted to the bank regulators, and their primary mission and their primary focus was on bank protection. And we do not create new powers so much here as take the powers that were vested in the Federal Reserve. Great defense of the Federal Reserve. I am struck by my Republican colleagues trying to defend the integrity of the Federal Reserve and the IRS. That's a new Republican Party. But we took it from the control of the currency, from the FDIC, and put them in a new agency whose only responsibility is consumers. It is not additional money, and it's not any new regulation. Now, we do add a set of unregulated entities previously, payday lenders and check cashers and others in the shadow banking system. So there is some increase in consumer protection. But fundamentally, we didn't say we just want one additional regulator. We have taken regulatory authority from the pro-bank regulators who haven't exercised it well and put it in a new agency. I thank the gentleman from Minnesota.
And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise? Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let's be clear about what's going on here, Madam Chair. I think it's pretty, it's crystal clear, frankly. This side tends to believe in more government. This side tends to believe in less government. This side tends to believe in more control. This side tends to believe in less control. This side tends to believe in more spending. This side tends to believe in less spending. This side tends to believe in more regulation and more oppression. This side tends to believe in less regulation and less oppression. This side believes in big government solutions. We believe in people. It's pretty simple. And if you believed in big government solutions, you got to ask the question, how's it going? And the fact of the matter is not going real well. Another 410,000 new individuals applying for unemployment today. This is a chart here, Madam Chair, that shows back before the big government folks got in charge, the amount of spending at the federal level. Down here in 2006, about $2.6 trillion. Here's where we are now, Madam Chair, way over on the other side. That's what big government does for you. It spends money that you don't have. Deficits, annual deficits, 1.4, 1.4, and $1.6 trillion in the last 3 fiscal years. So it's big government, government picking winners and losers, and that's where we are right now. Well, how's it going? The free market, frankly, can't function when the government is picking winners and losers, and that's exactly what the American people have gotten over the past 2 and 4 years, and certainly what it got last year when Congress passed the Dodd-Frank bill and formalized their new political economy. Now, the administration's Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection, what we're talking about right here, right now, charges bureaucrats to produce more red tape, regulations, none of which truly help the consumer. Now, they make for bigger government, that's right. But much like the new health care plan, which prevents the American people from picking a health care plan that works for them, the Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection would simply tell American families which financial product is right for them, which credit card is right for them, which bank account is right for them, which mortgage is right for them, directing people in very, very specific ways. Now, there are real challenges within our financial system. There's no doubt about it. Absolutely not. But the failure of the regulators to do their job, as my friend from Texas said, doesn't mean that you need more regulators. You need the regulators to do their job. And that's not what the CFPB does. The CFPB has been given authority to write the rules, to enforce the rules, to conduct examinations, to approve disclosures, and on and on and on and on. Is there anything that this federal agency is not allowed to do? Now, the underlying bill appropriately limits the use of the funds to carry out and implement the CFPB. This amendment, the amendment that we're discussing right now, expands the mandates, expands regulation, expands the economic tinkering that's been handed down from this administration and from Democrats in Congress. So if you like this track, if you like big government and you like more spending, if you like a government that borrows more and spends more and taxes more and destroys jobs, then side with the folks who are specialists in that area. If, however, you believe that we ought to spend less at the federal level, that we ought to spend within our means, that we ought to work as diligently as we can to create jobs, and that we ought to allow more freedom for more Americans, more choices for more Americans, then I would suggest and recommend that you vote down this amendment and support the underlying bill. And I yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina rise?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And let me just first be clear that we are not expanding anything in this amendment. The statute says exactly what the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is supposed to do. This amendment just allows the funding to enable them to do it. This is an appropriations bill. We're not supposed to be expanding or contracting anything in an appropriations bill. That's what I thought. The Appropriations Committee is about money, not about authority, not about expanding or contracting authority. So I don't know what my colleague was talking about when he says we're expanding something if we pass this amendment. Second, there's some debate from some of my colleagues. I could understand the first-term member who got up and says, I don't know why we have a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. What I can understand is why the subsequent colleague who serves on financial services got up and said the same thing because he was on the Financial Services Committee, served with me when we created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So let me just give a little history here about why we have it. We had theoretically consumer protection as one of the objectives of the Federal Reserve and other federal regulators. We had in that same Federal Reserve the responsibility for safety and soundness of our financial institutions. Those two things obviously were in conflict with each other because the Federal Reserve, instead of looking out for the interest of consumers and protecting consumers, allowed consumers to get into mortgages and financial transactions that ended up in destroying our financial system. And they did it saying that, well, you know, this is going to add to the safety and soundness of financial institutions because our definition of safety and soundness is a financial institution which can make more and more and more money. So, what's the solution to that? You don't do away with safety and soundness. We didn't do away with safety and soundness. It's important to protect safety and soundness of our financial institutions. We continue to give that responsibility to the Federal Reserve and the regulators. But if you are going to protect consumers, you don't give the authority to the same entity that has disregarded the interest of consumers and led us to a financial services meltdown. So we took those consumer protection responsibilities and put them into a separate entity called the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Now, the gentleman who was a freshman here, I don't expect that he would have been around to understand that. You know, he just got here. But for my colleagues who served on the Financial Protection, the Financial Services Committee, to get up and say, well, I don't know why we have a separate Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, they must not have been paying attention. Now, to do further, over the objections of some of us, we didn't want to necessarily put this in the Federal Reserve, but to get it funded appropriately, the Federal Reserve could set some fees and charge the industry for this agency, not the taxpayer. This is not taxpayers' money, at least not tax dollar money. I guess at some point, everything is taxpayer money, but this is not appropriated money. So this would come out of the Federal Reserve's budget, which I thought my colleagues didn't. They don't like the Federal Reserve anyway. At least that's what they've been telling us all this time. They want to do away with the Federal Reserve. You would think they would want to take some of their money and put it into Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. All this amendment does is try to restore the funding to a level so that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau can do what it is charged with doing. Let's not overstate or understate that. This is an important amendment. Let's support the amendment and pass it.
Time's expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Connecticut rise for 5 minutes?
Madam Chair, I rise in support of the Holt amendment. I was moved to come to the floor because I was stunned that in their deregulatory zeal, in their ideologically driven desire to shrink the size of government, that the Republican majority would choose to leave the American consumer unprotected. I represent a lot of American consumers, and I know that they don't really understand derivatives. I know that they don't really understand the concept of systemic risk, of credit default swaps, of many of the difficult things that we sought to regulate in Dodd-Frank, but they sure do understand what it means to open up that credit card bill at the end of the month and see hundreds of dollars of charges that they didn't anticipate. Millions of Americans now understand what it is to have a mortgage blow up on them. A mortgage that if we were all honest with each other, we would recognize that none of us really understand our own mortgages. Millions of Americans now know what it is to see interest rates hop up on a mortgage and to lose their homes. Of all the things that the Republican majority could choose to gut, that they would choose to leave the American consumer to be prey to predatory practices is unconscionable. Madam Chair, we don't allow toasters that will burn your house down. We don't allow cars that will blow up. But evidently the Republican majority would allow mortgages that would blow up your house or other financial products that would bring an American family to its knees. I've heard the counterarguments. I heard the gentleman from Georgia stand down there and say that this is an expansion of government spending. What the gentleman from Georgia didn't say is that probably the most politically unpopular bit of spending we've seen in the last several years was hundreds of billions of dollars requested by a Republican president and a Republican Secretary of the Treasury to bail out the financial industry. I'll say it again. Republicans requested the bailout. That was a terribly expensive thing to do. This Consumer Finance Protection Bureau will prevent that, help prevent that in the future. It's a good investment. I've heard arguments about czars. I must say, I've talked to tens of thousands of my constituents, and nobody is saying that czars are a problem in the United States of America today. I'm hearing a slightly better argument, but one that I don't accept as a former banker, that we are separating consumer protection from safety and soundness. As a former banker, I will say that those are not separate concepts. That when you have bank customers defaulting on their mortgages, when you have bank customers running up credit card debt and being subject to fees that they can't possibly repay, let me use that phrase again, that they can't possibly repay, you stick a knife into the safety and soundness of that bank or whatever institution that we are talking about. I will yield.
So you see the importance of having both of those issues and how there's not a hard dividing line between the two, is what you're saying?
That's correct.
So, but is, under the current statute, that Dodd-Frank, is the CFPB charged with looking at something other than consumer protection? Are they charged with looking at safety and soundness? And if they're not,
reclaiming my time, this country has long had a history of the examination of the safety and soundness of our banks. And what we are saying now is that we will assist and support the safety and soundness of our banks by keeping the customers of those banks from defaulting through good consumer protection. So I support the Holt Amendment and think this is terribly, terribly important to American families and the safety and soundness of the system, and I yield back the balance of my time.
From Connecticut, yields back the balance of his time.
I yield.
Does the gentleman
move to strike the last word?
Does the gentleman
and rise in support of the amendment, and I yield to the gentleman from North Carolina.
Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you,
for
Madam
5
Chair.
minutes.
I have heard Mr. Price's arguments before, and so I've talked to a lot of people about whether they really value the freedom to be cheated on credit cards, to be cheated on mortgages, to be cheated on overdraft fees, and I found that that was not really a freedom that they valued, and in fact they didn't really believe that that was the reason the financial industry was opposing consumer protection legislation. They thought that the reason the financial industry was opposing the legislation was so they could make more money and keep up by cheating people, which was not something they wanted. Any more than Americans 100 years ago really valued the right to buy rancid beef. As the meat packers argued a century ago, they were opposing pure food legislation so they could protect the right of people to buy rancid beef. Americans don't believe it. I asked the president of the American Bankers Association in committee if he could give me the names of some of the people
who qualified for prime mortgages but got a subprime mortgage, or someone who really wanted to have a credit card contract that required them to continue to pay interest on the balance even after they had paid off the balance. He said that was a rhetorical question, and he didn't have to answer it. It was just a rhetorical question. But I mean it. If somebody can tell me someone who qualified for a prime mortgage and instead asked for, wanted, chose a subprime mortgage, introduce them to me. If there's someone who actually wanted a credit card contract that required them to pay interest on the balance even after they paid off the balance, introduce them to me. I want to understand that consumer choice, because I have been assuming all along the reason they entered those contracts that were so hideous to them is that they got cheated.
Regaining my time, I yield to the gentlelady from New York for my remaining time.
Gentlelady from New York is recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding and for his leadership. I too rise in support of the Holt Amendment and ask unanimous consent to place in the record a 8-page document from the Americans for Financial Reform.
The gentlelady's request will be covered by general leave.
And this has 8 pages of state, local, and city organizations in support of an independent Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I'd also like to place in the record this excellent article from the National Journal entitled House GOP Targets the Consumer Protection Bureau with the CR.
The gentlelady's request will be covered under general leave.
And I must say that the Republicans are chipping away at the independence of this very important bureau. We put it in the Fed to have financial independence for regulation. They're putting it back under the appropriation system and cutting it dramatically. Dodd-Frank did a lot of good things, and one of them was to try to level the playing field with for the consumer with the creation of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. For far too long in our financial system and its products, any concerns about consumer protection came in a distant second, a third, or not at all. Now, any American who opens a checking or savings account, anyone who takes out a student loan or a mortgage, anyone who opens a credit card or takes out a payday loan will have a federal agency on their side to protect them. For the first time, Consumer Protection Authority will be housed in one place, and the Democrats funded it. The Republicans are taking away that funding and that independence. This is a critically important amendment for the financial independence, security, and well-being of the consumer in our country, and for really the financial system. We are suffering through the Great Recession because there was no oversight. The Democrats have put in oversight, accountability, and the Republicans lose the vote on the floor. We pass it, but they're trying to win by cutting away the funding so they can't function, so they can't do their job, taking away their independence. It is outrageous. It is wrong. It is an insult to the American people, and my friends on both sides of the aisle should join Congressman Holt in support of his important amendment. It is important to the financial independence, security of the American public, and I urge everyone to support it, and I yield my time back to the gentleman.
Gentleman from Washington.
Again, I strongly rise in support of the Holt Amendment. If you look at history, in the years around 2003 to 2005, this budget was cut.
Time's expired.
So vote for the Holt Amendment. And we want to vote.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New Jersey. Those in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Madam Chair,
on that I ask a
recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New Jersey will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed in the congressional record on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment number 189 by Ms. Woolsey of California. Amendment number 208 by Mr. Cole of Oklahoma. Amendment number 514 by Mr. Price of North Carolina. Amendment number 404 by Mr. Walden of Oregon. Amendment number 516 by Mr. Camp of Michigan. Amendment number 195 by Ms. Loomis of Wyoming. Amendment number 165 by Mr. Carter of Texas. Amendment number 204 by Mr. Scalise of Louisiana. Amendment number 458 by Mr. Frank of Massachusetts. Amendment number 506 by Mr. Holt of New Jersey. The chair will reduce to 2 minutes the time for any electronic vote after the first vote in the series. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on Amendment number 189, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by the gentlewoman of California, Ms. Woolsey, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 189, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Ms. Woolsey of California.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of a request where the recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered, and members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
Votes now on another set of 10 amendments as the House continues work on the continuing resolution to fund the federal government through September. This is a defense-related amendment offered by Lynn Woolsey of California. It would prohibit funding under this bill for expeditionary fighting vehicles or the V-22 Osprey aircraft. We spoke earlier to a Capitol Hill reporter who's been following the progress of the spending bill that will keep the government running past March 4th.
Anna Palmer is Roll Call's House Leadership Reporter. Well, we're into day 3 of amendment debate on this proposal to keep the federal government funded through September. How are things going?
Well, I think it's going a little slower than House Republicans would like, and even for those House Democrats that are looking forward to the work week next week, they have had a hard time kind of working the way through all of these hundreds and hundreds of amendments, and unfortunately, they had tried to schedule it for the final vote at 3 p.m. today on Thursday, and that does not look doable in the least.
Well, how many more amendments can we expect to be offered?
I think there's at least several hundred that they're working through now, and that is even until the end of the bill. Right now we're on the limitations section where they're trying to kind of take away some parts of the funding. But there's this whole other package at the end of the bill that still has to get debated.
Are there any of those that you're keeping track of?
We're looking a lot in terms of the health care funding. One of the things that a lot of the conservative Republicans have had a lot of hopes at doing is kind of defunding the health care bill that Democrats and the Obama administration signed into law last year.
Are you hearing anything at all from Republican leaders about when we could see final passage on this?
I think they're trying to keep their troops in line, but there's definitely been a nod to, this is going to be a very late night tonight, and even there's an expectation to kind of that this could go as far into Saturday morning, although I think once you start seeing, people start looking at when their plane tickets are to go home back to their districts, they're ready to vote sooner rather than later.
Now, your story in Roll Call today talks about the new chair of the House Appropriations Committee, Congressman Harold Rogers of Kentucky. How has his approach to the job changed over the years?
Certainly, he's untested. He just got the chairmanship this Congress, the 112th Congress, and he is, I think, a very even-tempered kind of leader, and has really deputized the Cardinals on his committee to take leadership and ownership of different sections of the bill that has, I think, garnered him a lot of support within his conference.
Now, he apparently is now getting behind spending cuts rather than spending.
Yes, it's definitely a different tact. A lot of the old line Republicans and Democrats, for that matter, and the appropriators, have a history of bringing home the bacon. I think Mr. Rogers' nickname was the quote-unquote Prince of Pork, and to obtain that chairmanship, he really had to convince the conference that he was serious about doing spending cuts, and so far has kept to his word.
The Republican Study Committee, how much influence have they had on this whole process?
And they've definitely had a lot. I mean, compared to the cuts in the beginning, what the GOP leadership had, kind of initially sought, they went back to the drawing board after the RSC and freshman conservatives had some real concerns that they weren't going to hit that, $100 billion mark in cuts. But you've also seen, I think, has been very interesting, the moderate Republicans emerging with some of the Democrats to kind of make some of the biggest cuts. One of the biggest cuts was the $450 million that sophomore Rooney from Florida kind of was shepherding that takes away the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter funding.
So when the House finally does pass a CR, what's likely to happen with it in the Senate?
Well, I think we've seen the kind of the back and forth and jockeying that's already started in terms of the shutdown and people talking about government shutdown. House Republicans insist that they do not want to do that. They want the Senate to take up the bill. However, I think it's pretty unlikely that you're going to see these big, deep cuts, go forward with a Democratic controlled Senate.
Anna Palmer is the House Leadership Reporter for Roll Call. We thank you for your time today.
Thanks a lot.
Again, the first of 10 amendments to be voted on in this segment, among hundreds that were submitted to this spending bill. The House is likely to work late today to finish, but if not, debate will continue into tomorrow. House Speaker John Boehner today said Republicans will reject any legislation funding the government at current levels. The spending bill being debated in the House would cut $100 billion from the 2011 budget submitted by President Obama last year. At his weekly briefing, Speaker Boehner also comments on amendments to the budget bill that impact his congressional district.
Morning, everyone. As part of our effort to liberate our economy from the shackles of out-of-control spending, the House will soon vote to cut discretionary spending by over $100 billion over the last 7 months of this fiscal year. And that's 5 times larger than any discretionary spending cut ever considered by the House. We've exceeded the commitment that we made in our Pledge to America, and there are more reforms and more cuts to come. To reduce uncertainty and create a better environment for job creation, we need to cut wasteful spending, and we need to stop Washington's spending binge. As you know, I sent a statement to the President signed by 150 economists who say that we need to cut spending to get our economy moving again. Excessive government spending is hampering private sector job creation by spreading uncertainty, eroding confidence, and discouraging private investment, and it has to stop. Going forward, we're going to continue to listen to the American people, focusing on creating a better environment for job creation in our country. We're not just going to cut discretionary spending, but also wasteful mandatory spending. And in the spring, you'll see our budget, which will chart a new path towards prosperity and address our fiscal challenges, including entitlement spending. This cannot be said of the job-crushing budget that President Obama has submitted. Not only does the President's budget destroy jobs by spending too much, borrowing too much, and taxing too much, it also punts on the tough choices, including entitlement reform. We need to have an adult conversation on entitlements, and the President needs to lead that discussion. He was elected to lead, not to sit on the sidelines. It's also clear that we need to have a conversation with leaders in his own party who continue to deny there's even a problem. Let me tell you what, there is a problem. We're broke. And the President's budget shows clearly he's committed to more stimulus spending that he began some 2 years ago. In that time, 1.8 million private sector jobs have been lost. Unemployment is at 9%. And even though the President's people said that unemployment would never exceed 8%, he signed that bill into law. The legacy of the stimulus spending binge is clear. It failed. Private sector job creation in our country is stalled. And Americans are still asking the same question: where are the jobs? Let me close by reminding all of you how this year began, when the President asked the Congress to increase the debt limit without any kind of commitment to cutting spending that got us into this mess. The American people have made clear they're not going to tolerate an increase in the debt limit unless spending cuts and reforms are implemented. Unfortunately, the President has only offered more of the same failed stimulus spending. We have some Democrats here in Capitol Hill threatening to shut down the government rather than to cut spending and to follow the will of the American people. Our majority remains committed to listening to the American people and doing everything we can to create an environment for better job growth in our country.
Mr. Speaker, before the adult conversation on entitlements, are you ready to broker an adult conversation on the CR? Because now that there's a veto threat, it looks like there has to be one. Are you ready to broker one between Majority Leader Reid, the President, and your own conference?
I'm focusing on having the House complete its work on the continuing resolution, and I'm hopeful that the Senate leaders and the White House will listen to the American people and are ready to get serious about cutting spending.
When do you expect that vote to come? When do you expect that vote to come?
I don't know.
Mr.
Speaker.
Mr. Boehner, and you said $100 billion. Are you saying that for fiscal year 2011, which ends on September 30th, House Republicans will cut $100 billion from the current budget, not $60 billion, it's 100?
We're going to cut $100 billion based on the budget that the President submitted.
Okay, so not what we're currently operating.
Can you explain what this adult conversation about entitlements should entail and what will be in the budget to address the entitlement issue?
Well, I think if we're going to talk about entitlements, the first step ought to be laying out the size of the problem. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, we've got to lay out the problem so the American people understand clearly how big a problem is this. And once people understand how big the problem is, then and only then should we begin to talk about an array of possible solutions. And out of that conversation, we'll begin to determine what's doable and what isn't. But I think it has to be a thoughtful, deliberate discussion if we're really going to solve this problem. If we get into the same Washington leading with solutions before people understand the problem, we're going to end up where we always end up, doing nothing.
So what would be in the budget? What would be, like, if you can't have this discussion in time to release the budget in April,
I'm confident that Paul Ryan and our Budget Committee will work with our members to do a responsible budget that deals with the pressing issues that face our country.
Mr. Speaker. Question on Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Earlier this year, Representative Duncan Hunter introduced legislation that would expand the certification requirement for the Pentagon to implement repeal. Will that see a vote in 112th Congress?
We'll see what the committee recommends.
Mr. Speaker, you appear to make border security cuts on the CR when 2 ICE agents were attacked in Mexico this week, and considering Republicans are always insisting that the border is not secure.
We believe that it's important to secure our border and end the violence on our border. And I'm not sure of the specifics that you're referring to, but we remain committed to securing our border. Yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker, House Democrats have seized on your comments a couple days ago about the so be it with jobs potentially being lost in this bill. I'm wondering if you'd care to clarify those comments.
Listen, I don't want anyone to lose their job, whether they're a federal employee or not. But come on, we're broke. We've got to make tough decisions, and the American people sent their representatives here to Washington to make tough decisions on their behalf. And we know that we can't continue to spend 40 cents, or we can't continue to borrow 40 cents for every dollar the federal government spends.
Mr. Speaker, on that issue, this open process on the CR that you've been touting a lot, it's essentially going to end up costing your district jobs. Are you concerned about the sort of conflict between having this open process and your...
I am committed to the House working its will, and it did yesterday. This is not about me. This is not about my district. This ought to be about the U.S. House speaking on behalf of all Americans, both Democrats and Republicans.
Will you try to get that money restored as this process moves through the Senate?
And no comment.
If I could follow on that. This is about your job. This is about your district and loss of jobs in your district. How will you explain to your constituents about those job losses
when they, in fact, see tax breaks for the wealthiest Americans and for subsidies for oil companies? How do you reconcile that?
Listen, the House spoke. It wasn't about me imposing my will on the House. The House of Representatives spoke. This is a legislative process that's going to continue. I can't predict what the Senate will or will not do. But if we're serious about solving our deficit problem and solving our debt problem, two things have to happen. We've got to get our arms around spending, and we have to have real economic growth. And you can't have real economic growth if you want to tax the very people that we expect to invest in our economy. Half of the people who will be taxed under your so-called taxes for the rich are small business people who operate as sole proprietorships or subchapter S corporations where the income from their business is passed through on their personal income tax. The more they pay in taxes, the less they're going to be able to invest in their business. And this is why real job creation, real economic growth, and getting our arms around spending will be the most important things that we can do to create a better environment for job creation in our country.
Mr. Speaker, you said a few minutes ago that you'll go after wasteful mandatory spending. Will that be part of the budget, or is that a separate thing before the budget?
I would expect that we would see committees act and the floor act on wasteful mandatory spending cuts before the budget.
Mr. Speaker, you criticized the President for failing to lead on entitlement reform. In his defense yesterday, he said that any time an initiative has the Obama label on it, Republicans reject it outright. Is he wrong about that?
I've made it clear to the President, I'm ready to join him. I'm ready to have this conversation. I said it right to his face because I'm ready to sit down with the President. I'm ready to start the conversation, and I think the American people are ready for the conversation as well.
Mr. Speaker, if the House and the Senate can't reach agreement on the CR by March 4th, would you be willing to entertain a short-term CR at current levels?
We're going to do everything that we can to cut spending. We're hopeful that the Senate will take up the House-passed bill that comes out of here today, tonight, tomorrow morning, whenever it is. We'll hope they will move it. But our goal here is to cut spending. But I am not going to move any kind of short-term CR at current levels. When we say we're going to cut spending, read my lips. We're going to cut spending. Thanks.
The House continues to vote on amendments to the spending bill that will fund the federal government for the remainder of this budget year. The vote that's underway on a defense-related amendment introduced earlier today by California Democratic Representative Lynn Woolsey.
Amendment number 189, printed in the congressional record, offered by Ms. Woolsey of California.
The gentlelady from California is recognized for 5 minutes. The gentleman from Kentucky.
I reserve a point of order on the gentlelady.
Point of order is reserved. Gentlelady from California.
Mr. Chairman, this amendment would eliminate the V-22 Osprey aircraft and the expeditionary fighting vehicle. For years, the Pentagon has been throwing billions at weapons systems that don't work and don't keep us safe. Weapons systems that are obsolete in the post-Cold War era. Weapons systems that are not giving us bang for our buck. The V-22 Osprey is essentially a lemon. It makes defense contractors rich, but doesn't make our military strong. It has a notoriously bad safety record, having killed 30 of our own people in training exercises, and a deadly V-22 crash in Afghanistan last year was claimed as a victory by the Taliban. Billions over budget for a weapons system that's killing our own people. Not a good deal for the taxpayers, to say the least. The GAO has noted that this plane has trouble flying over 8,000 feet or in extreme heat. It also has problems carrying troops, transporting cargo, and operating in high-threat environments. A combat plane that can't operate in high-threat environments? Is there anything the Osprey can do? Actually, can it deliver mail?
The President's Deficit Commission recently recommended we stop writing blank checks for the Osprey. So did another top official who more than 20 years ago said, and I quote him, "Given the risk we face from a military standpoint, the V-22 is at the bottom of the list, and for that reason, I decided to terminate it," unquote. That's not a prominent Democrat speaking, Mr. Chairman. That's a former Secretary of Defense named Dick Cheney. The Marine Corps Expeditionary Fighting Vehicle would provide almost as much savings, between $8 and $9 billion over the next decade. The President's proposed budget pulls the plug on this system, which is more than 14 years behind schedule and has also experienced major cost overruns. According to the task force on a unified security budget, the EFV breaks down on average every 8 hours and has trouble steering in water. Shouldn't we be worried about an amphibious vehicle that doesn't steer well in water? Would you spend billions of dollars on a family car that breaks down every 8 hours and doesn't steer well? And besides, even if the EFV ran like a dream, when was the last time we needed to launch an attack by sea? Once again, we're developing weapons for enemies that no longer exist. With spending cut fever having hit Capitol Hill, you would think these wasteful systems would be among the very first on the chopping block. But naturally, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would rather scale back the very things keeping people safe and strong. Police on the streets, investments in innovation and infrastructure, NIH research, education assistance, from Head Start to Pell Grant, and much, much more. I say we go in a different direction. If we're serious about restoring fiscal discipline, both the F-22 Osprey and the EFV must go. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Does the gentleman from Kentucky still continue to reserve his point of order?
I withdraw the reservation on the point of order.
The reservation is withdrawn. Who seeks recognition? The gentleman from Washington.
I move to strike the record a number of words and just to make this statement.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
We have already had a straight up or down vote on the Osprey and resoundingly supported it here in the committee. On the expeditionary fighting vehicle, there's a decision been made by the Secretary of Navy to end this program. What we're trying to do is to do it in a way that finishes the research with an additional $34 million and avoids termination liability. So I urge a no on this amendment, and I'll yield to my friend from Florida, the chairman, if you have any comment on this.
Thank the gentleman for yielding, Mr. Chairman. And I rise in opposition to the amendment. We just had a very good colloquy on the issue of the EFV, and we think we have a solution here that is good for the taxpayer, is good for the Marine Corps, is good for the Marines. Here's an opportunity to get something for the $3 billion that we've already spent on this program. So I must be opposed to that. And on the V-22, we've already voted on that once during the earlier procedures on this bill. The V-22 did have some developmental problems years ago. The V-22 is a most effective weapon being used in Afghanistan. Because of the high mountains, because of the high altitudes, because of the weather, the V-22 is the vehicle of choice to move our warfighters.
The yeas are 91, the nays are 339. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on Amendment 208, printed in the congressional record, offered by the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Cole, of which further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 208, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Cole of Oklahoma.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of a request for the recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, the recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
This amendment, sponsored by Oklahoma Republican Tom Cole, would prohibit funds from being used to fund the presidential election campaign fund or for political conventions. 8 other amendments, votes on 8 others still to come.
On this vote, the yeas are 247, the nays are 175. The amendment is agreed to. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on amendment number 514, printed in the congressional record, offered by the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Price, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 514, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Price of North Carolina.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
So this amendment would bar funds that would expand pre-9/11 fire grant programs through the use of firefighting hiring of grants. The Senate is in tonight, and they're continuing to work on a bill reauthorizing Federal Aviation Administration programs that are set to expire March 31st. Majority Leader Reid has expressed hope that the Senate could have a final vote on the FAA late today or tomorrow before senators then depart for the President's Day recess. This bill would provide satellite-based air traffic control systems for the nation's busiest airports, and it creates a passenger Bill of Rights, including the right to deplane an aircraft that's stuck on a tarmac for 3 hours.
On this vote, the yeas are 267, the nays are 159. The amendment is agreed to. One present. The unfinished business is on the request for a recorded vote on amendment number 404, printed in the congressional record, offered by the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Walden, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 404, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Walden of Oregon.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
This amendment would bar the FCC from implementing its new net neutrality rules. Votes on 6 other amendments coming up. So House leaders are trying to wrap up a $1.2 trillion spending bill to fund the Pentagon and the operating budgets of every cabinet agency and provide $158 billion for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Following House action that may finish tonight, the Democratic-controlled Senate must then act, and President Barack Obama has threatened to use his veto if the measure cuts too deeply.
On this vote, the yeas are 244 and the nays are 181. The amendment is agreed to. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on Amendment 516, printed in the congressional record, offered by the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Camp, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 516, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Camp of Michigan.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered, and members will record their vote by electronic devices. Will be a 2-minute vote.
This amendment, offered by Michigan Democrat Dave Camp, bars funds from being used for the opening of certain locks that may open the Great Lakes to Asian carp. An amendment voted on and passed earlier today by another Michigan representative, Tim Walberg, Republican from Michigan, would further cut the National Endowment for the Arts by $21 million. That passed on a vote of 217 to 209. And an attempt by Representative Charles Bass of New Hampshire would restore $50 million to the $390 million cut to a program offering heating subsidies for the poor, and that failed by a vote of 322 to 104.
On this vote, the yeas are 137, the nays are 292, one present. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 195, printed in the congressional record, offered by the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Loomis, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 195, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mrs. Loomis of Wyoming.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
This amendment, sponsored by Wyoming Republican Cynthia Loomis, would deny persons who sued the federal government and won their cases from recovering court costs from the government.
On this vote, the yeas are 232 and the nays are 197. The amendment is agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 165, printed in the congressional record, offered by the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Carter, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 165, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Carter, Texas.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted, a sufficient number having arisen. The recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 250, the nays are 177. The amendment is agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on the amendment number 204, printed in the congressional record, offered by the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 204, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Scalise of Louisiana.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of a request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted, a sufficient number having arisen. A recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 249 and the nays are 179, with one voting present. The amendment is agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 458, printed in the congressional record, offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Frank, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 458, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Frank of Massachusetts.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
One more vote following this one. This amendment would transfer $131 million to the Securities and Exchange Commission from the Treasury Department and the IRS.
On this vote, the yeas are 160 and the nays are 270, and the amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 506, printed in the congressional record, offered by the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Holt, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 506, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Holt of New Jersey.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having arisen, the recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
This is the 10th and final vote in this segment. This amendment would also reduce IRS spending, this time by $63 million, and increase the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau funding. More debate on the continuing resolution tonight, also more votes, and possibly a final vote. This $1.2 trillion legislation funds the Pentagon, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the operating budgets of every cabinet agency.
On this vote, the yeas are 163, the nays are 265. The amendment is not agreed to.
Oh, that's...
The House will be in order. Thank you. Committee will be in order. What purpose does the gentlelady from Minnesota rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.